It's every traveler's nightmare. After all of your planning and preparation, you arrive at your destination and something's wrong. Either it's the wrong location, the weather isn't what you expected, there's too many crowds, it could be anything. In this video, we walk you through some of the things that can go wrong, what you can do to prevent some things, and then how to make the best out of a bad situation. I'm Judy.
And I'm Kevin. Welcome back to Finding Gina Marie, where we share our lives as full-time travelers and the connections we make along the way. We'll get to everything that can go wrong, but first, let's start with a few situations that have gone wrong for us.
Of course, misery loves company. We've been fortunate that we really haven't been in any unsafe location or accommodations. But in Buenos Aires, I remember feeling a little bit uncomfortable.
Now, part of that was probably because we had so many people warning us that lots of countries in South America are unsafe, and there are so many warnings. And even people that were local were like, you should really be careful in this area. So I think that influenced us an awful lot.
We really had nothing to be concerned about in retrospect, but if you're in a situation and you ever feel truly unsafe, and after trying to work it out with your accommodations, if you're not getting immediate comfort, go ahead and just find other accommodations in a better part of town, in a safer place, and worry about the cost later.
We have an article on our website that talks about safety precautions, what you can do about it, and even some products you can carry along with you that'll make you feel safer. So check it out.
I think those are especially useful if you're a solo traveler or a woman. It can be frustrating when the time of year you pick is wrong for the location that you chose, and also when there are seasonal closures. For instance, we visited Lecce, Italy in February. We had no idea we were going to freeze there.
Problem was, the Russia-Ukraine war had just started and fuel prices had skyrocketed. So our host was acting like every degree of temperature in our place was going to kill her. And she controlled the thermostat. We didn't even have any control. So we just asked her, could you give us a little bit more heat? And what was her solution?
She gave us blankets, and that wasn't really what we had in mind. It was also really cold outside, obviously. And although we carry clothes for 3 seasons, we did not have clothes for the bitter cold that we had there.
It was so bad that I actually looked for a store to buy a winter coat, which I don't want to carry around a winter coat, but we were so desperate. And luckily I found this discount place that was like half price for everything. And I found a really big, comfortable coat, and it made the trip a lot better.
And we ended up covering up under blankets. We watched some Doctor Who. We made the best of it.
Yeah, it wasn't the most productive trip because things were also closed down. A lot of times in Italy, you'll go in August and you'll say, well, everyone's on vacation, so the shops are closing down. And you don't want to go that time of year.
But you know that in advance.
Yeah, February wasn't this expected month. We didn't know what was going on, except maybe everyone else was freezing too. So they had hightailed it out of town to some warmer country.
So note to our future selves, if we want to visit Italy, we don't do it in February, especially when we like to eat outside. There is no alfresco dining in February in Italy.
And if you've seen our scheduling video, you'll know we moved a few things around because it was just going to be too cold in Europe. Some things aren't seasonal. They're not something you can schedule around, like construction. We've gone into a couple places like Verona, where we're sitting in a really nice apartment, and suddenly this horrendous noise of jackhammers and hammering and drills and everything else right next to us.
Yeah, it felt like they were coming in right above our heads, straight into our faces. And it turned out that it wasn't even in our building. Yeah. So when we had commented to our host about the issue, he said, I have no control over the construction that happens in my neighborhood. And granted, he didn't. And he ended up bringing over a bottle of wine as an apology. And we're not opposed to a little bit of vino to kind of help situations go a little bit better.
Some people can't deal with the noise, and luckily we were mostly touring in that city, so we weren't just sitting in our apartment working.
In addition to spending all day touring, we also ended up taking an overnight trip to Lake Como. So we weren't in the accommodations for very long, and fortunately the construction did slow down.
No matter what the noise is, maybe it's not construction, maybe it's just street noise or something else that's around you, Carrying earplugs might help, or having like an app that does white noise for you, or even turning on a fan in the room may distract you from that noise and could help your stay. Now, sometimes the accommodations themselves can have a really negative effect on your travel experience. We had an issue with Saigon, and we didn't see anything wrong with the Airbnb on the listing. Looked great, the room was big enough, certainly had everything we needed. We did not know that the 10th floor apartment, or 9th floor apartment, whichever it was way up there, had only one elevator to access it. We didn't also realize that everybody in the building was going to use this elevator, and it was very crowded throughout the day. And we also didn't realize that it was in a garage where hundreds of motorcycles were being stored, so there was fumes and heat and just nasty smells while you're waiting in the garage for this elevator on a day that's really hot outside. And then you're riding up this elevator multiple floors. Turns out it just made our experience so much worse, even though we checked everything out and everything else looked good about it.
All of those fumes were really problematic for Kevin. But the other issue that we had was a little bit of culture shock. We weren't really prepared for the part of Vietnam that we were in. We specifically chose a popular area that was great for tourists, but exactly where on the map we were located was not ideal. It was a very local place, which in most cases would be great for us. But we were concerned with some of the hygiene that we saw, and it made us uncomfortable to figure out where to eat. And when you're hangry and you're not really comfortable with eating in certain places, it made things really hard.
Well, right outside our building, there was people on little stools, and they had like a tree stump, and they were cutting up chicken and beef. And it's like, you can't do that on a tree stump outside in 90-degree weather.
Now, culturally, whatever, it worked out for them, but made us uncomfortable.
Now, to add on top of that, we just came from Japan, which was pristine and precise and everything was clean. So that might have had something to do with it. And of course, every little bit of an experience. I mean, if we would have just moved over to the other side of the highway in that same district, that may have been fine. We may have walked around.
Oh, completely. I definitely feel if we wouldn't have had the highway to have to navigate, which was a little bit like Frogger, and there were a few more options that we would have felt a little more comfortable with as we were acclimating to a new culture, I think it would have helped a lot. This was probably the only time that our solution was to leave early. Now, fortunately, our accommodations in Saigon were very inexpensive, $22 a night. We were going to be celebrating our 40th wedding anniversary. We just didn't want this to be our experience for that. So we made different arrangements. We spent a week in Hanoi, and then we ended up coming back to Vietnam to give it more time because we really loved Hanoi.
Yeah. So Hoi An was wonderful. The country was wonderful. We just had a bad first experience because of our accommodations just hit us wrong.
And although it wasn't the cultural food experience that we wanted to have initially, we ended up eating overpriced burgers and at a fancy chocolate shop for breakfast. Not ideal at all, but it was the best way we knew at the time to salvage some of those early days. And that was fine.
Everyone has their own reason for visiting someplace. We love to be in a city center with culture and history and just be able to stroll around. And sometimes we book in the wrong spot because it's too far away from those places we want to be, like Vienna. We loved Vienna. We loved the idea of being in this really popular city. But to save some money, we were 2 subway stations away from the city center, which turned out to be 2 subway stations too far.
We've learned for us that it's worth it to be in the heart of the city than be on the fringes of it. And even if that means that we have to stay for a less amount of time, it's worth it for us to do that in order to have the experience we want.
This is also why we shortened our trip to Kotar, Montenegro. We knew that we wanted to be in the city center. We knew it was an expensive city. So what we did was shortened our time there. Sometimes a place isn't what you imagined. You do all your planning, you get to a city, and it just lacks the charm you were looking for.
That was our situation in San Jose, Costa Rica. We didn't want to incur the extra expense and time of taking a 3-hour drive to be situated somewhere else than the city center. But we didn't realize that It was a fairly nondescript city, and when it came right down to it, some of the museums just really didn't excite us the way I thought that they would, especially for how much history and culture we enjoy.
And when you have volcanoes and parks and beaches and shorelines and all this wildlife and all this excitement outside of these cities, San Jose didn't look at all good. And we should have just listened to everybody and said, this is not a place to go visit culture in a city. We should be out in all this wildlife. So that's what we did. We ended up doing excursions and really loving the end of our trip there.
Now, we did end up eating at a couple of really cool restaurants, so we did redeem our time overall. And I think we were really happy with how we balanced things out, even though it wasn't part of our original plan to do that.
Sometimes when you go to a place, it's a disaster. I mean, literally a disaster, natural disaster. What about Taiwan?
We were there when a 7.4 earthquake hit. Fortunately, there was no damage to the area that we were in. Although some of the day trips that we had planned to have were off the table, we really wanted to visit Taroko Gorge. And in fact, that was one of the reasons that we were most excited to be visiting Taiwan. We made the best of it. We ended up going to restaurants and museums, and even Taipei 101, we splurged and spent some time up there. We redeemed the time. It wasn't what we expected it to be, but it was still really great.
Yeah, and you can't plan around stuff like that. There's just no way. So you make the best of it. Do what you can. Do you have any horror stories about travel? We'd love to hear about them in the comments below.
So what are the ways that you can avoid some of the most common problems? The first is to pick the right season. We typically travel during shoulder season when the costs are a little bit lower, and so are the crowds. The weather may not be perfect, but it's usually good enough.
But you do want to avoid extreme weather. We don't want to travel in the winter, obviously. Summer season may be too hot for some people. You've got to pick the right season for you that you want to enjoy.
And you also need to be mindful of the fact that there is a rainy season and a dry season. Dry season means less rain or no rain, but it also might be not as colorful as you might prefer it to be.
Now, Machu Picchu turned out to be really good in the rainy season for us. Other years it may be really bad. You can't predict all that stuff, but if you know exactly what you're going there for, like I want to see flowers, I want to see green, maybe the rainy season's worth sticking it out.
Exactly. You just need to understand what you're gaining and what you're giving up.
And that's especially true when you're visiting beach locations. You don't want to be on an island where there's beautiful beaches, but no facilities. They've shut down all the shops, all the wonderful restaurants, everything else that you expect to be there. It's gone because it's not the season for it.
Of course, you want to pick the right location for you. If you're interested in nightlife, you want to make sure that you're near to it or in a city that even has that.
Yeah. If you're looking for culture and things like we're looking for with museums and other things like that, city center usually is the spot to be.
And if you're someone who likes a walkable city, make sure that it is. You don't want to find out that it's super hilly, especially if you have mobility issues.
And if there's no public transportation and you don't want to rent a car, you want to make sure you can get around that city. Another thing you can do is pick the right accommodations. We go through a process of looking for things that we want to have in a place. And because we're trying to save money and because we stay longer, we look for kitchens and some space where we can work, seating, things like that that make our life better for the time we're in a place.
If you have a long stay somewhere, it makes sense for you to get recommendations from other people who've traveled to that area so that you're not going in blind. You might also want to book a couple of days and then explore different places and meet with different people before you commit to 3 months somewhere that you might end up being miserable. You also want to have a checklist of the things that are most important to you. And when you're reading reviews, look at all of the photos and read through things very carefully, triple check them. And when there are warnings in reviews, you should believe what people have written.
And if a place has very few reviews, it makes Judy nervous. So we're wary of those places and we do extra research to make sure we're comfortable with them.
We actually have a lot of opinions about how to pick the right accommodations. If you'd actually like us to do a video about that, let us know in the comments.
And if you're anything like us, food is an important part of your travels. So when we go to a place, we look for local cuisine, we look for places we can eat out that have authentic food. We're searching for places that we can learn more about where we're staying.
Yeah, some of our favorite memories are the restaurants and the foods that we've eaten in different locations. While sometimes food tours can be expensive, if you're really uncomfortable in a city, it is a great way to find some good food that's safe to eat. And also we get recommendations from people who've traveled there previously. We are always asking hosts for their favorite restaurants near to the area where we are. Do everything you can to be comfortable with the food that you're going to be eating. Travel is a series of trial and error and really getting to know yourself. And that is one of the things that we are learning as we continue to travel. As we mentioned, we like being in the city center, but we also have talked to people who say that having a bedroom is important to us. So look at the square footage of the accommodations that you're booking. If you're tall, make sure that the bed is going to be big enough. Do the things that you need to do that are going to make you the most comfortable.
And if you're like us and you don't like cold weather, make sure you're not booking travel in a place that's going to be very cold. And make sure that you're comfortable with everything that you get to do in that area. Is it going to give you the activities that you want to do?
Skip the high season if you're someone who wants all of the Instagram-worthy pictures without the crowds. That's why we travel in shoulder season. You can have all of the same experiences, but with fewer people. You might not have the ideal weather in shoulder season, but if you understand what your priorities are, you'll know what you're giving up and understand what you're getting for the compromises you're having to make.
And know what things bother you. If you're a person that's very sensitive to noise or very sensitive to light, make sure that you understand what your accommodations are going to be and the area you're in.
And if you know yourself, it does make it easier when you're picking accommodations and location. For us, I don't mind street noises. I kind of like them. So I'm not deterred when I'm hearing that it's near a restaurant or there's a lot of street noise. I like a place that has a lot of light. So that's also something that we prioritize. But our daughter really likes everything dark so that she can sleep without any issues. Make sure there's room darkening shades if that's important to you.
Do you have any tips we missed? Let us know in the comments.
So here are a few more ideas on how to redeem a mistake or a bad situation.
If you travel a lot like us, you're going to run into these problems and you're just going to have to find ways to work around them.
Yeah, if you're expecting to travel and not make mistakes, I'm sorry, that's not going to work. There are always going to be mistakes no matter how much you prepare or plan.
And it's not always your mistakes, but things just happen around you and you have to be flexible, adaptable, and creative sometimes.
So no matter what goes wrong, there's always workarounds.
Like if you have to change locations like we did in Vietnam, it may cost you a little bit of money. We consider those sunk costs. It was worth it to us to have a better experience in a country that we didn't want to have that first impression as our only impression.
And Hanoi ended up being a great place for us to spend our anniversary.
And if you didn't pack right for the place you are, buy some clothes. I mean, like I did in Lecce, that was important to me to be warm because I actually wanted to go on tours and not be shivering the whole time. So adapt. If you want to go to the beach suddenly and didn't pack bathing suits, buy bathing suits.
We don't typically carry a winter hat or gloves, but if we need them, we're prepared to buy them where we are without worrying about it. And those are things that we'll just donate after our trip because we don't want to carry them with us our entire time. So it's not a matter of poor planning. It's just a matter of buying what you need where you are.
And we've been in some spots where the pillows are technically pillows, but they're not really pillows. They're so flat, they don't support your head. But if you really need a good night's sleep and a pillow is an important thing to you, travel with a pillow or just buy a pillow in the location you're at.
We've been able to make do with some not ideal pillows, but we've always managed to sleep just fine. But if that's not you and you don't get good rest because you need a specific pillow, either work with your host or your accommodations to have them swap it out for something that does work for you, or spend $50 and get a new pillow for the amount of time you're going to be there. Sleep is really important, and if it helps you to not be grumpy while you're on vacation, it's worth it. Of course, spending that money that you hadn't planned to is not ideal, but everything will look better after a good night's sleep.
And it's important to think outside the box for activities. You know, in San Jose, Julie did a really good job of finding tours and things we could do when we weren't happy with where we were staying.
If you're in a boring location and maybe there's not something that you can do to salvage it, or you're in a beach town and everything is closed, this is maybe the time to get out a deck of cards or to get a good book. I know for myself, I always want to be going to a park and just reading, and there's not always time to do that. So it may not be the trip that you planned to have, but it could be fun to play some board games, do some things that you aren't used to doing on vacation, and just having some bonding time.
And one of Judy's favorite things to suggest is taking a cooking class when we're in a location. May not be my favorite thing, but she loves them.
Well, and if you like to cook, it is a great opportunity to have a local experience learning about the flavors of the city that you're in. One of the nice things is that that's not always a seasonal activity, so you can book something like that year round. And it adds something to your repertoire.
And I have had fun in them. I'm just always grumpy about having to sign up for them. And maybe you're in a location that offers massages and things like that. And you may want to treat yourself. I'm not having the vacation I want, so I'm going to go have a spa day or something.
I like booking some activities through Airbnb experiences because some of those are really off the beaten path ideas. So you could take an art class or a jewelry making class or a Tai Chi class. There's a wide assortment of locals who are eager to share their experiences there.
And sometimes it's worth it to schedule a day trip or two. You may just need to get out of the place you are and experience something totally different. Be flexible. Sometimes don't worry about the money and just make that happen.
Sometimes there are places that may not be on your radar for an actual vacation, but spending a day trip there could be very interesting.
And overall, we've learned that we really need to be flexible.
And sometimes when a trip doesn't go the way you planned, they make for the best stories. It's never so fun to share stories when everything goes well. People want to hear about the mishaps and the things that went sideways. It makes you a more interesting person if you have a sense of humor and you're able to make lemonade out of lemons.
Laugh about things, and maybe they will be more fun.
You'll enjoy traveling so much more if you're just willing to be adaptable when things don't always go your way. We hope this episode has been helpful. If you haven't already subscribed, we'd love for you to do that.
Check out findinggina.com. We have articles, downloads, our free community forum, and you can check out our behind-the-scenes benefits for our Gelato members.
Until next time.
Until next time.